Alright, if you guys are ready, it is 10:30, but if you're not ready, that's cool too. Whatever. Anyway, I was kind of hoping to open up in prayer because I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I don't really talk in front of people very often, so I kind of like to pray before and, like, I don't know, get into the groove. So if you will, bow your heads with me. Dear God, I want to thank you for this day. I want to thank you for the words that I'm about to speak and the fact that it's coming from your word. I pray that my words reflect yours in content and in tone and in emphasis, and that you just have me say what you wish for these people to hear. In your name, amen. Okay, so, hi Sam. This is another thing about me. I don't really like preaching at people, so I just kind of prefer to sit and have a conversation with you. So I don't really think that I'll probably get up and, like, start moving around or anything, so you guys are free to, like, relax, whatever. I just don't really like preaching at people because I'm a youth ministry major, so I don't like preach. I just kind of like talk to 13-year-olds, and it's pretty hype. I like them a lot. But today we are going to do a deep dive into the bleeding woman in both Luke and Mark. I find her very, like, extremely interesting. I started studying Luke in November of 2022, and I'm only on chapter 9. Because I got stuck on Luke chapter 8, this story, for about 2 months. And that's why I kind of felt that it was important for me to talk about, because I was like, I care about that story. And it's God's word, so that's also cool. But the reason I think I related to her so much was because when I was in middle school, this is also part of the reason I got into youth ministry, I hated being noticed. I wore all black every single day. I didn't do, like, fun things with my hair. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't do anything that would make me stand out because I didn't want to. I wanted to blend in and I wanted to go unnoticed because I didn't want the attention on me, which is kind of funny now considering, like, me as a person. I mean, like, look at the pants that I'm wearing and tell me that I don't like being the center of attention. But I don't know. I feel like I related to her a lot because she wanted to go unnoticed. And it was just interesting to me to understand why. So if you guys will, we're going to read both Mark and Luke. First Luke. So open up to Luke chapter 8. The verses are 42, like the latter part of 42 through 48. So we're going to read it first, and then I'll kind of go through a deep dive everything. But Luke chapter 8, verse 42 says, "As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. 'Who touched me?' Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you.' But Jesus said, 'Someone touched me. I know that the power has gone out from me.' Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace.'" I kind of want to explain a little bit of the context behind that verse. In 42, it says, "As Jesus was on his way." The very interesting thing about this woman is that she was not his main priority in the moment. He was actually on his way to go heal the official Jairus. He was like a Pharisee at the time. His daughter was suffering, and he was on his way to go heal her, and was crowded around by a bunch of people on his way, because, you know, people knew who Jesus was, so they were like, "Bro, come here." But he, like, this woman wasn't his main priority at the moment, but he took the time to kind of stop and make her a priority, which I just think was interesting. Now, if we go and look at Mark, it's Mark chapter 5, verses 24, like the latter part, and through 34. And it says, "A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, 'If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed.' Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt her body that she was freed from suffering. At once Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, 'Who touched my clothes?' You see the people in the crowd.
"You see the people crowding against you," the disciples answered, "yet you asked, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering."
What I like about this woman is that she does not have a name. Like many women in the Bible, she is not given a name. Like, we don't know her name. We don't know anything about her other than the fact that she suffered from this affliction. We know that she reached out and touched Jesus, but that's all we really have on her, which I just think is interesting. Because in her life, we only get 14 verses of who she is. And in that verse, a couple things are laid down. She suffers from bleeding, which is not the kind of bleeding like, I got a paper cut, now I'm bleeding. It's like the other kind of bleeding that like women have all the time. So that's exciting. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting because this condition caused suffering for her because she bled nonstop for 12 years, which is a lot. Like, we do it for like a week, a month, and we're like, this is too much. But she was nonstop for 12 years, which, like, if you think about that, how painful must that have been? How much would she have cramped, suffered, just agonizing pain for 12 years straight? And another thing about that time is that would have been seen, like, afflictions and disease and sickness would have been seen as a result of sin at the time. And so if she would have gone to doctors, they would have tried to do what they could have, but at the end of the day, they would have said, like, this is a sin either that you committed or that your parents committed, so you need to go atone for it. And that kind of brings us into Levitical law. Like I said, this is kind of a deep dive, so I like went all over the Bible. There's all sorts of notes in here. But if you look back into Leviticus, which is not really something that people do all the time, Leviticus chapter 15 talks about this kind of statement. In verse 25, it says, when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Unclean. That's a word that is dehumanizing. You know what I mean? Like, it's odd to me that, like, because she had this condition, she was ostracized and isolated. She was unclean. Everything that she touched, sat on, or wore would have been considered unclean. Anybody who touched her, who spoke to her, who interacted with her would have been unclean as well. Because she was unclean, she was unable to worship in the temples. She was unable to go and worship God in the place where she worshiped for 12 years. Like, that boggles my mind, because she wouldn't have had, like, text for herself. She wouldn't have been able to learn anything about God outside of the temple. But this affliction kept her out, kept her isolated not only from people, but also from God. And that broke my heart. At this time, like I said, the Pharisees would have taught that this suffering came from sin. So she would have thought she did something wrong, her parents did something wrong, and now she's suffering for 12 years with no cure. Mark says she spent all she had. She had no money left. She could do nothing else besides reach out and pray. Like in Mark, like I said, he gives us kind of a look into her mind, which is something that I love about Mark. Luke gives us a lot of details, but Mark really like deep dives into like, what is she thinking right now? And in verse 28, it says, she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Imagine, like, you spend every single penny that you have on care for something and nothing can be done about it. And it's your last hope to reach out to someone and just hope it'll work. She's thinking, if I just touch his clothes. That, dude, the amount of faith that she had is something that I don't think that I could even have. And it's incredible. And then in Luke, we see in verse 44 that she touched the edge of his cloak. So like, I wore a cardigan yesterday accidentally, but then I realized that it was really good for this like little lesson kind of thing, so I did it again. so I'm an outfit repeater. Sorry, guys. But, like, think about the edge of your clothing. Like, this little corner would be the edge of my cardigan. She would have touched this above my fingers. And she would have been healed from something that she suffered from for 12 years. 12 years is a long time. I'm 19 years old. Sorry, I had to think about it. And so, like, a grand majority of my life, had I been suffering from the same thing, would have been spent outside of God, outside of people, outside of everything. And with just this little corner of a piece of fabric, it went away. Immediately, she was healed. How incredible. Like, guys, I love this story so much. I can't even express it to you. It's just insane. And then another thing is, after Jesus was touched, it said he felt the power go out from him. And he immediately turned around and asked, "Who touched me?" Now, are we seriously thinking that Jesus didn't know who touched him? Come on. Jesus knows our hearts, he knows our souls, he knows our minds. Of course he knows who touched him. He wasn't asking to figure it out. He was asking because he wanted her to be known publicly. This affliction isolated her for 12 years, and she finally is being asked about. She went from having nobody talk to her, nobody touch her, nobody think of her for 12 years to who touched me. And this is something that I find very interesting because Jesus almost forced her to come forward. Because he asked who touched him, and the disciples are like, "Dude, like, you're in a crowd, people are gonna touch you." Like, you know that sound on TikTok that's like, "It's a cow farm, you're gonna have cows outside." Same thing. Like, it's just like, he was like, oh, this is another thing. Have you guys ever gone to a concert before? Probably, right? So you know that, like, when people are in the crowd, you're in the crowd. You're gonna get pushed, you're gonna get shoved, you're gonna get, like, prodded out of the way. That's the same thing that was happening to Jesus. Jesus was, like, the rock star of his day. Because he went around and, like, healed people and just, like, spoke amazing sermons and was just around. And people loved him. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to, like, be close to him. So, like, of course, Jesus is gonna get, like, pushed around a little bit prodded, like, all that kind of stuff. And the disciples are pointing that out. They're like, "Dude, like, obviously, look around you. Look at how many people are here. You're gonna get pushed around." But he still stopped, even though he was on the way to something. He stopped, and he asked, "Who touched me? Who touched my clothes?" And he kind of, like, forced her to come forward in that. Which is very interesting, because then it says she told the whole truth. And that is another thing that it kind of hurts a little bit. Like, I hurt for her when I read that. Because in telling the whole truth, that means she would have to make her shame publicly known. She would have to tell people why she touched Jesus, why she needed to. And if you think about it, she came from behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She didn't come in front of him. She didn't present herself before Jesus. She wanted to go unnoticed because that was what she was used to. And she tried to go unnoticed, but Jesus made her the center of attention. In touching him, he made her affliction publicly known because he asked her about it. He asked her what she suffered from. He asked her why she touched him. And she had to tell the people around her that she had suffered with this bleeding for 12 years. And they all knew what that meant. They knew the law. They lived by it. They knew that she was ostracized and isolated. But Jesus welcomed her. I follow this account on Instagram. The account is Anthony Garola. Essentially what he does is he illustrates Bible verses. And that was kind of the thing that got me into, like, going and looking in my Bible, because he would illustrate something and I'd be like, "I don't know that story." So I would, like, go through and look at it. But as I was reading this story for the first time, he posted something about it, which is like, God is really working, guys. I don't know what else to tell you. But he posted something about it, and he said something that just, it, like, unlocked things for me that I would not have ever known had he not posted. But he said the sentence, "Her blood spoke shame. His blood spoke her name." This woman was isolated and ostracized because of a bleeding condition. Her blood was shameful, but when Jesus came and died on the cross, his blood was sacrificial. In bleeding for her sins, he freed her from something that shamed her for years. And being there and being present in her life, he freed her from agony, from pain, and from suffering, not just in her body, but in her soul. And it's incredible to me. And so the question that I did kind of say that I was going to answer in the little thing that you guys read that kind of made you come here. So, hey, God does heal physically, obviously. We've read about it. He does it. He heals the blind. He heals this woman that bleeds. He heals people that are paralytic. We know that he's done it. And even now, I still think he does it. Like, I feel like I've seen his healing in my life, in, like, medical diagnoses and things like that. But I feel like first, before he heals physically, he heals spiritually, like in your soul. And I feel like that's done through 3 ways. Through conviction, through prayer, and through your loved ones. Through conviction, I recently had a friend or someone in my life that went through one of the hardest convictions of his life. He, through a friend that he knew, was kind of brought to the conclusion that he was unable to forgive people because of his own pride. He held grudges and he just lacked forgiveness, which is an attribute that Christ has, obviously, because he came and died and forgave our sins. But in that conviction, he's been healed. Because I remember he called me sobbing, crying. He didn't know what to do. And all we could do was pray. Pray that God would work in his life. Pray that God would give him Christ-like attributes. And since then, he's been able to forgive things that have happened to him. And he's been able to focus on God and focus on the fact that Christ forgives, so therefore he should also forgive. And it's incredible. The second way is through prayers. Recently I had a very scary health thing happen, which is kind of also why I wanted to talk about this. And I went to doctors and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. There was no answers. Nothing showed up on charts, nothing showed up ever. Like, we just couldn't figure it out. And what I should have done first, but ended up doing last, was I prayed and I cried out for God. Because I was riddled with this anxiety that I just could not shake. Like, you know when people are sitting in class and, like, their leg shakes and it, like, bounces the whole table? It's, like, kind of annoying. That was my everyday for close to 2 months. I shook in ways that I had never shaken before. My hands shook, my voice shook, I was unconfident, and I just had no peace for months. And I didn't know what else to do besides turn to God. And that's what this woman did. She had no other options. She had spent her money on doctors, and she had tried so hard to free herself from this affliction, but once she reached out to Jesus, she was healed. A similar thing happened to me. I prayed and I cried and I asked for peace and I asked God to restore my mind and restore my soul. And he did. He gave me peace like no other. He led me to the Psalms. And you guys know David. He's something. He laments and he is joyful and it's just a ride. But he led me to the Psalms and he led me to this story. And as soon as I went back to the doctor, she had an answer. It's interesting the way that God uses his hand in things. Because sometimes he gives you trials to push you closer to him. And then finally, God, I feel like, heals through loved ones. Because, like, we, as people that follow Christ, are called to love like Christ loves. And even people that don't really follow Christ are still able to provide comfort and provide love to people, which I think is so cool. Because love is not, like, exclusive to Christians, but Christians do it best, in my personal experience. The love that I have experienced from my friend that this conviction held, the doctors that I saw, my family, my friends, the people that live on my hall, has been immense. And I cannot thank God enough for the people that he has put in my life, because they have pushed me closer to him. And truly and honestly, I feel like being pushed closer to Christ is the way that changes you the most. James 1:17 says that every good and perfect gift comes from above, and I believe that's true. I believe that's true in conviction, in prayer, and in friends. Because prayer is given by God, convictions are given by God, and friends are also given by God. And they're all good. I just feel like sometimes God gives us like little tangible ways to show his love. Because he feels kind of far sometimes. You feel isolated, you feel ostracized. But he reaches out in ways that you maybe don't expect. So in conclusion, Christ heals then, and he heals now. He has, he will, and he will continue to do all sorts of healing in our lives. But I think the most important thing about Christ is although he does heal physically, he heals your soul first. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father except through Christ. And I think that's incredible. Because there is nothing in this world like the sacrificial love of Jesus Christ. And the fact that he came into our lives to love us and to die on a cross so that we can be with God and we can commune with God and live eternity with him. There is nothing like it. And it does so much healing for your soul when you begin to realize that your eternity is set. You are in the kingdom of heaven and you are saved. No longer do you suffer. I mean, of course, you still suffer a little bit because this is life, and life is not great all the time. The kingdom of the air is not super fantastic, but in that kingdom, we can see God and his creation and his goodness. And that's healing. That's it.